fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to the Dirty Birds and Brews podcast. I am your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic Kevin, joined by a very special guest today. He is a good friend of mine and the managing editor over at the Vikings Wire, Tyler Forness at The Real Forno. Tyler, how you doing?
Life is good. Just getting prepared for the draft. I've got a bunch of fun stuff coming in the pipeline. I'm doing a deep dive on Kwesi Adofo-Mensah right now to try and figure out some predictive traits of his. And I know with you guys having just moved on from Thomas Dimitroff a couple years ago, trying to figure out your new GM has been a challenge, and I'm going through the same thing.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. Like with Dimitroff, it was sort of like, oh, I think I've started to get the hang of this, but especially with him and Dan Quinn, they definitely had their types. But then when a new guy comes in, it's like, well, you can just throw all that out the window. Now we have no idea. But what is it? Is this going to be the second draft with Kwesi over there with the Vikings?
Yeah, he took the job in January of 2022, and we have some things we can go off of, but when you're using a scouting staff that isn't your own and you're trying to implement all of your systems, you can't get that done in 3 months. You just can't. So I'm excited to see how this continues to grow and evolve.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun time for the Vikings. I know you guys are dealing with your own issues. The Falcons, of course, dealing with a number of their own issues. But we'll start off the show with something that seems like a positive for Atlanta, getting former number 3 overall pick Jeff Okudah from the Lions for just a 5th-round pick, which to me seems like a bargain. I know Okudah's dealt with some injuries, but definitely a guy I loved coming out of the draft just a few years ago. Finally was able to stay healthy last year. I know you've seen him a handful of times since you guys play the Lions, twice a year at least. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about Jeff Okudah? Do you think the Falcons maybe got something here, especially for the 5th-round pick, or are you a little bit more skeptical of his value going forward?
I think it's a great move for the Falcons for a 5th-round pick because he was a top 3 pick in the draft, and the entire industry was very high on Okudah, and his film at Ohio State really exemplified that. Now, when you talk about what he's going to be moving forward, it's a real question mark, right? He's been injured, but through the first half of last year, he was very good. He's probably best in zone coverage rather than straight man-to-man. But when you have A.J. Terrell on one side, you're going to be drawing like the second guy. So it's going to be a lot easier to pallet for Okudah. And at only $5.1 million and a 5th-round pick, this is a great dart throw because if he hits, it's phenomenal. Then all of a sudden, you have a secondary with A.J. Terrell, a really good Jeff Okudah, and Jesse Bates. You're locked and loaded, ready to go, and you feel really comfortable with your back end. Now, if it doesn't work out, you spend $5.1 million and a 5th-round pick on a really smart, calculated dart throw. If it doesn't work, you just wipe your hands of it and move on. But this is a fantastic, fantastic move for the Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cost is so low, and it's one of those things, right? When you finally have money, you're able to do things like this by taking expensive players off of other teams' hands for low compensation. So it's certainly nice to have some cap space for a change here in Atlanta to be able to make some moves like this. And the Falcons also, signed Mike Hughes. So that's 2 members of the Lions secondary last year that was very, very bad as a whole. So clearly Atlanta must think that they were doing something wrong if they're actually going after pieces from this Lions secondary, which I had trouble understanding how that defense was so bad considering the front that was in front of them. But, I guess we're going to find out very soon if it was who was the actual issue on that defense, because it's going to look completely different there in Detroit, and the Falcons are going to have a couple of those guys. So interesting times. Well, let's move on to Falcons draft stuff, which I know is your expertise. You've been grinding the film. I saw you at the Senior Bowl. We talked about a lot of players, but on this show, we've already talked about a lot of the major names that are linked to the Falcons at this point. Guys like Tyree Wilson at edge, Bijan Robinson even at running back, the corners, although maybe that's slightly less likely now with the Okudah pickup. I know you're also a big fan of Quentin Johnston, and we haven't really talked about him at all on this show. I don't know if you're like a fan of the Falcons targeting him at 8 necessarily. That might be a little early. I don't know exactly how you feel about that. But yeah, talk to me about Quentin Johnston because I know you're a big fan of his, and if they were gonna take a wide receiver early, I feel like it would probably be him because he sort of fits the Arthur Smith archetype of size and physicality.
So here's the thing with Johnston, and I think it's the DK Metcalf conundrum, and the Falcons kind of proved this when they took Drake London at 8th overall last year. It's not about what you can't do, what can you do? And London was so good at what he could do, it kind of made up a little bit for what he couldn't do. He's not a burner. He's not going to be phenomenal after the catch as far as running in open space, but he's a big box-out guy who's going to give you a huge target, and he's going to be able to win a lot of those contested catches because of how he plays the game. And those elements from an X receiver are really nice. Now, it's kind of similar with Johnston. I relate him to DK Metcalf. He is not DK Metcalf. They play a different style of football. But one thing that you can extrapolate from both of them is they're both great at down the field. They can both high point and win contested catches. Now, people will look at, he only caught 8 of 24 contested catches. It's a little overblown. Max Duggan was really, really bad last year. 5 of those incompletions were drawn pass interference penalties. 8 of those attempts were slants, hitches, and crossing routes, and I'm talking shallow crossers like mesh.
Yeah.
And those contested catches are much easier for a cornerback to get in on. And when you look at all of those elements, he's really not as bad as you think. There were multiple, just awfully thrown balls. There were 2 of them that were just thrown completely out of bounds. And Johnston leaped and made a great catch, but the ball was thrown so far out that he had no chance of getting his foot down. So it has to be contextualized. And I talk about this a lot. I don't care what the stat is. If you don't contextualize it fairly or properly, the stat's worthless. You say, Josh Allen had, 47% completion percentage one year at Wyoming. Now he's a top 5 quarterback in football. You have to contextualize the why. The why is way more important because it tells you, can this get better? Why did it happen? And all those elements make such a big impact. A running back can have 1,000 yards rushing, but if he averages 3 yards a carry, who cares? He's only getting 3 yards a carry. That, all those mean something. And with Johnston, he's not great with change of direction, just like Metcalf. He's going to be a guy that's going to need to learn nuance, like how to lean and attack leverage. And once he learns how to do those things at a higher level, he's going to be a much more complete receiver. But he's dominant in 2 areas. One, going deep. He's fantastic. He understands how to win, how to stack, and how to go up and attack the football. And 2, he's great with yards after the catch. For a guy that's nearly 6'3" and 215 pounds, he's got very quick, nimble feet, and he can break tackles and evade defenders. If you haven't introduced yourself to Quentin Johnston at all, go turn on the game against Kansas from this past year. It shows you a little bit of everything that you want with Johnston. It has a really bad rep where he's running a post and is completely oblivious to the safety, and the safety just comes and picks it off and makes a lot of contact with him. But later on in the season, they play Oklahoma State, and he completely remedied that. He learned from it. He sees the safety and then goes attacks shallow underneath in front of the safety, and you could see that growth, which is why watching games in concurrent fashion chronologically helps you see growth and evolution with football players. I love Johnston. He is right now my number 3 player in this class, but I will say and contextualize, I'm probably not watching any offensive linemen because I haven't had time and the Vikings don't need them. So I understand and have seen enough of guys like Skoronski, Jones, Paris Johnson Jr. to have conversations, but I don't have scouting reports written. That's not what my business is right now.
Right.
Time is getting away, but Johnston is a dude, and I think he can be a number 1 in on offense.
Yeah. I know you're a big fan of him for sure, and we're sort of the same way because you're scouting very much for the Vikings. I'm scouting very much for the Falcons. We're not just out here watching 200 guys and putting generic grades. We're evaluating through the lens of what does our team need and going from that route. So, that doesn't surprise me, but the context is important, of course, as you said. Keeping on the offensive side, Bijan Robinson has been a very hot topic for the Falcons because I think they're the first team that has a realistic chance of taking him. And I'm curious what your thoughts on that pick are. Obviously, it's a running back in the top 10, but Bijan's a very unique player. I think people labeling him as just a running back maybe are doing him a little bit of a disservice, but I'm curious what your thoughts on that potential pairing are.
My dog's biting behind me. Which pairing?
Bijan and the Falcons.
Look, when it comes to the Falcons taking Bijan Robinson, look, people may not want to hear it, but I really feel it's inevitable with Arthur Smith trying to attack with a true bell cow running back. And like, how much of that Tennessee offense was just him utilizing what he had versus him wanting that? I think you could argue that it's two different things. I think he's going to want a bell cow. I think with the way he wants to run his offense, he would prefer to have that. And Cordero Patterson is not quite that. Neither is Tyler Algier. I think they're both capable running backs. They're not special. Patterson is still special in the return game.
Yeah.
Like, that's one thing he's been great at his entire career. And if you had a Hall of Fame for return guys, Cordell Patterson's in consideration. But when you look at the whole picture, Bijan's special. He's got incredible feet. Vision is spectacular. And even though he ran just above a 4.4, I don't like, he breaks away on tape.
Yeah,
he breaks away on tape, and he's able to make big plays. Now, some people argue, well, he hasn't quite hit the home run. Dude turns like a 10-yard gain into a 50-yard game. To me, that's a home run. And you don't need to break off 70-yard runs. Like, in Jonathan Taylor's first 2 years, he has like 9 touchdowns of like 40 yards or more. Like, it's okay. Like, you don't, like, that's a fantastic number, but we're not even talking like one every other game. We're talking like one every 4. Like, there's so much more to the running back position to hitting a home run than just going 90 yards for a touchdown. And Bijan can do a little bit of everything. There's a rep against Alabama from earlier this year where he's running a wheel route, and he has to basically flip his hips and jump, exuding great body control to go leap and catch the football. This dude can be a receiver. If there hasn't been anything close enough to Christian McCaffrey since he came into the league, Bijan might be the closest as far as being a true complete package of being able to do everything at a high level. Right now, I'll have to pull it up. I think he's my number 4 player in the class as I stall to get my Google sheet open.
Loading.
Right now, he's my number 4 player in the class, and I've watched all of the top, like the first round caliber guys, except for, I think, Kalijah Cansey, the offensive lineman. This is a dude. And if you take him here, I get it. I also get the positional value argument. Like, you're not going to create enough surplus value with a running back in the top 10. Like, and that's such a big part of that, being able to create a championship contender is being able to get like top end play for not a lot of money. And that's where people always talk about the premium positions: cornerback, offensive line, defensive line, quarterback, wide receiver. If you get a Justin Jefferson at $4 million a year, which is what the Vikings cap hit is for him next year, that is a surplus value of like $23 million. Like, that is how you're able to make big playoff runs. And that's why teams like the Chiefs getting 7th round picks and turning them into starting cornerbacks, that's like $8 to $10 million in surplus value right there. That's how you are able to take it to the next level. Is getting Bijan at this spot good enough to be able to help this offense? I think he's going to help the offense, but the surplus value is not there. And that's something that the Falcons are really going to have to talk about in the war room, because it's a very interesting conundrum.
Yeah. Part of me wonders if I believe their faith in Desmond Ritter is 100% legit. Like, I don't think they're in on quarterback, and maybe we could talk about that next. Your thoughts on sort of the quarterback group and what you think the Falcons might do there. But I wonder if they're tempted to go the Bijan route because they believe they've got their quarterback starter in Ritter. And of course, they're going to be getting, if he's an average NFL starter, they're getting 25 million in surplus value on Ritter's contract for the next 3 seasons. So I wonder if that would potentially make them consider Bijan a little bit more because they know, well, we don't have to maximize this selection. We can get the guy we think is going to move the needle the most for our offense, which, for being honest, could be Bijan at that spot, the guy that's potentially going to help them the most. But on that overall discussion, also, like, do you believe that they do believe in Ritter enough to take that sort of step?
That's a great question, and obviously I don't know much about like what the Falcons are thinking in that spot. I'll speak in platitudes here because I think the general tone of what you believe is going to determine your outcome. If you believe Ritter has a good chance to be the guy, you keep him and you build around him. If you have questions, and let's hypothetically say you believe Will Levis is the next transcendent quarterback, you believe he's going to be a borderline all-pro player, and you think he has that type of ceiling and you're going to get him there, you take him and you don't think twice. And I don't necessarily believe Will Levis is that guy, but Will Levis is probably going to be the guy available for the Falcons at 8 if there is one of those top 4. If you think he's that guy, you can't say no unless you know Ritter is already that guy, because you don't want to say no to a great player because you have a good one on the roster. The Vikings have done it multiple times. They did it with Adrian Peterson in 2007. They signed a free agent running back named Chester Taylor, had like 1,600 all-purpose yards, 15 touchdowns. Guess what? They drafted Adrian Peterson, and he's going to be in the Hall of Fame in about 6-7 years. Like, you can't say no to a great one because you have a good one on the roster. And I don't think they'll end up taking a quarterback, so the whole point's kind of moot. But I think you need to really look at it from that lens. What do you think of this guy, and what do you think of the guy who you'd be taking to replace him? You think that much highly of the guy in this class? There's really no point in waiting. You put in a third-round pick on Ritter, who, I'll be honest, I did not like very much coming out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, you weren't as high on him. Yeah.
He was my 6th-ranked quarterback. I was very out on Ritter compared to the rest of the class. I'll never forget the game he had against Army in 2021. The dude couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. And
that was a rough one.
I was
probably his worst game on tape. Yeah,
it was so bad. I'm just out on him, and obviously last year's quarterback class isn't exactly flush. I was talking about Malik Willis being a top 5 pick. We all know that. I get reminded about every other day, but I'm not out on Malik Willis yet. It's year 1, but I didn't see enough from Ritter last year to know for sure, hey, this is my future. This is the guy. But I think they're going to probably roll with it because they saw what happened with Jalen Hurts. He showed a little bit early on, but you still had a lot of questions. 2021 came around. He's like, we still have more questions. Let's load up around him. Let's get A.J. Brown. And guess what? Almost won the damn Super Bowl. So, like, I understand the thought process behind keeping him. Personally, I would take the quarterback if you believe in that guy. But if you want to help him, getting him more weapons is a really good way to do that.
Yeah, and the same argument could be made for Bijan. The Falcons do have Tyler Algier, who was good. He broke their rookie record for most rushing yards, and all things like that. And I think he's a good player, but you don't make if you think Bijan is like, oh, this is going to be a Hall of Fame running back, this is going to be the best running back in the NFL, you don't pass on him just to make sure that Tyler Algier gets 200 plus carries next year. And I think you can make that argument at a lot of positions for a lot of teams, like you were saying. So definitely something good to consider.
Yeah, the whole thing's interesting because what they believe at the quarterback position, and we're talking about this with the Vikings right now. Some people are like, oh, just wait for 2024, go get Caleb Williams or Drake May. Well, if quarterback needy teams are at 1 and 2 and they don't want to trade, you're shit out of luck. You can't just sit and wait on a guy. If you identify a player, you go get him, and you are aggressive in doing so. I'm a huge proponent of that. If the Falcons see their guy, they need to go get him. But the most likely option is they keep Ritter and try and continue to build a team around him by utilizing great surplus value.
Yeah, I think that's a good call there. And in terms of the other options available at 8, the Falcons have been linked to a lot of cornerbacks. I do wonder if the Okudah thing changes anything there. But how do you feel about the Christian Gonzalez, Devon Witherspoon debate at the top there.
I think Joey Porter Jr. needs to be in that debate too. And
Yep.
I have Porter Jr. as my second-ranked corner. And I'll say this about the Falcons. Getting Okudah on a one-year rental, prove-it kind of deal should not tell them they shouldn't take a cornerback. If cornerback's number one on the board for them, you take him, and you don't think twice. Cornerback is such a volatile position. Like A.J. Terrell, like borderline all-pro caliber guy, may suck the rest of his career. It's just that type of position. Remember Xavier Rhodes 2017?
Yep.
Top 3 cornerback in football. Phenomenal. By 2019, he was basically done. He was already shot, and he was a 2013 first-round pick. Like, you just don't know with these guys, and it's such a there's such a mental strain on cornerbacks because you're basically playing to lose the least amount possible. So it's a very tough position, and the farther away you get from the snap of the football, the harder your position becomes. So I would feel really good about taking a cornerback here. Christian Gonzalez is my number 1 guy. Witherspoon is my number 3. But all 3 of those guys, including Porter Jr., within 0.3 points. So I believe in all of these players as first-round caliber talents. But Gonzalez does a little bit of everything. He can play press. He can play press bail. He can play zone. He can drop. Like, he can play off. Whatever you need Gonzalez to do, he can do with great athleticism. His sister is an Olympian. If you remember watching Hard Knocks with the Lions, that his sister is David Blau's wife.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah. So it's an incredibly athletic family, and he showed off that athleticism. If I would take Gonzalez over any other corner at this spot. If you are a team that just wants to play a lot of press, like the Vikings, I think would prefer Devin Witherspoon or Joey Porter Jr. because they're going to be playing about 50% press man. Like, that's just kind of what their defense is based on. For the Falcons, I think Gonzalez is the smarter choice, but you still can't go wrong taking Witherspoon or Porter Jr. They're both great players. I just think you would be using them more out of their comfort zone and what they're truly great at than Gonzalez. And I think you could get a little bit better value considering the defense with Gonzalez. You should not rule out corner here.
No, definitely not. I agree with that take for sure. The other spot most frequently mocked is edge, and this is a very interesting edge group. There's a lot of differing opinions as to who should be in consideration at the top. Obviously, Will Anderson not likely to be on the board at 8, but we could see Tyree Wilson. We could see like Lucas Van Ness. Nolan Smith has been gaining some steam. What do you think about this edge group, and are any of those guys top 10 talents that the Falcons should consider at 8 if they're there?
So I have a little bit of a different view on the edge group. Tyree Wilson's my top edge, but I also think he might be better playing a J.J. Watt type of role. And I don't say that meaning I think he's J.J. Watt. I think his skill set would be at his absolute best playing like J.J. Watt or like Eric Armstead. And when you talk about comps, there's multiple ways to do it. I like to do play style. And play style-wise, I think he's best suited as a J.J. Watt type of player. Get him on the inside. Start him as a 5 technique. Move him on inside on passing downs. Let him use his incredible length, get off on the football, and teach him technique. You can do those things, and you can unlock just an incredible football player. He's got the highest ceiling of this entire group. Will Anderson is not on the level of some of the edges we've seen in the past. The Bosa brothers, Khalil Mack, Myles Garrett. He's not there. He's a step below. But he is a very good football player who, quite frankly, was played out of position at Alabama. They asked him to do a lot of 4-eye, but in college football, you're using a lot of tight and min fronts where like you have your defensive ends inside, like 3-3-5 kind of stuff. That's not his game. He's capable-ish, but he's going to get washed out in the NFL doing that. You want him as a stand-up edge. In this defense, he's going to be allowed to do that. I'm looking at everything. Obviously, you just invested a second-round pick in Arnold Ebiketie and a third-round pick in one of my favorite players, D'Angelo Malone, in last year's draft class. That shouldn't tell you shouldn't take an edge. One guy I will pound the table for because I think he might be better off as like a Calais Campbell understudy than a true stand-up edge rusher. Clemson's Miles Murphy. I think he has the type of frame at 6'5.5", 272. You could give him 20 more pounds. With his explosiveness, he ran a 4.5 240. He's just absurd as an athlete, but he's not a bendy guy. And I think if you build him up strength-wise, get some really good weight on him his rookie year, by year 2, you can have him take over for Calais Campbell. And all of a sudden, you've got yourself a really good 5 technique for the next 10 years. And I think that might be his best, the best way to utilize him. And then you can continue to develop Malone, Ebiketie. I like Ogundeji. He's not a traditional stand-up kind of edge rusher, more of a 5 technique and an even front. But I really liked his game coming out of Notre Dame. Lorenzo Carter is fine. Caden Ellis is fine. And you can really develop Murphy, because I think having that dominant front, you have Grady Jarrett. You just got David Onyemata from New Orleans. Get Miles Murphy up there and just wreak havoc. I think that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, do you think he's someone they should consider at 8, or maybe as like a trade up later in the draft? It seems like Murphy's stock has cooled off a little bit, but
look, I'll say this. This class doesn't make any sense. And here's what I mean by that. I think Miles Murphy could easily go top 10. I think he could fall in the mid-20s. Like, this class has the quarterbacks. It's got Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, and then a bunch of I don't know.
Yeah.
The value between pick 20 and pick 60 is not going to be that big of a disparity. It's a very similar prospect pool. I have been doing tracking of the Vikings first round picks from industry leaders since January 1st. I've tracked over 330 mock drafts. We have 53 different players picked to the Vikings at pick 23 or with a trade. 53 different players, and that should tell you a lot about this class. Murphy could easily go at 8, but I think you might be able to get away with the trade down before 15, because if I think he gets to the Packers will take him. He screams Green Bay Packer. They took Rashawn Gary at 12 a few years ago. That's just what they do. They take stupid athletes and try to make them football players, and they're usually pretty good at it. Yeah. So, if you want him, I think you probably do a slight trade back from 8, but you might have to take him there if that's the guy you've identified.
Yeah. Well, we talked about a lot of names here, but I know you do a lot of mocks as well. Where do you sort of think the Falcons go generally when you do your mocks? Where do you sort of see them going ultimately at 8?
Well, fun fact, Kevin, I just had a 2-round mock drop on VikingsWire.com this morning. Before the Jeff Okudah trade, I had them taking Christian Gonzalez. After the Jeff Okudah trade, I actually have them landing Will Anderson at 8. I don't know if he's going to fall that far, but quarterbacks went top 4, and the Seahawks are going to Seahawk, and I had them taking Miles Murphy as the first defensive player off the board. The Seahawks always Seahawk. That's just what they do. And I think that they could be enamored with the guy that they see as, this could be our next Michael Bennett, but just a stupidly better athlete. And Will Anderson at 8, that's a pipe dream, but it's something that I think needs to be considered, especially if quarterbacks infiltrate the top 4, because the Lions are almost going to guaranteed to take a corner. Yeah. It's a non-zero possibility that Will Anderson gets to 8. It's a unlikely one, but I would see edge or corner. I don't think they necessarily need offensive line, but if they fall in love with a Skoronski, a Paris Johnson Jr., I don't think you can say no to that. It's a very interesting spot. I also think it's a great trade down spot if a quarterback falls, and I think the Falcons should try and take advantage of getting some extra draft capital.
Yeah, I definitely did a mock. I think it was last week or the week before, where they traded down to 11 with the Titans when Will Levis fell to 8. And, they pick up a third out of it. Not like we're not talking huge compensation. But, I mean, you move down to 11, you probably get the same guy you were going to take at 8. I took Bijan at that spot just because people had asked me to do a trade down and asked me to take Bijan in a mock. So I was like, okay, well, you guys get both in one mock. So, but yeah, I think this is the type of class where I think you're going to get really good value with trade downs, especially once you're past like the first couple of guys. But the one guy I think that they'll take without question is probably Tyree Wilson. Because you mentioned Calais Campbell understudy. That would be another guy that would be really good to have Campbell Tudor. I mean, they're not the same player. Campbell's definitely much more of that explosive athlete, but another guy with just insane length and measurables, who's probably going to play, inside outside role. So could definitely see them going that route, and I'm sure you'd be happy with that too, considering he's your top edge. So
yeah. I love what Tyree Wilson's game is, and putting him behind Campbell, just like with Myles Murphy, I think would be a phenomenal idea, because there's a lot less pressure when you don't have to come in and be that dominant force right away, and you're learning from one of the best to ever do it in Campbell.
Yeah. It'd be a good one. It'd be a fun one. So, Tyler, thank you again so much for coming on and sharing your insights into this draft class. Guys, he is Tyler Forness at The Real Forno, managing editor over at the Vikings Wire. And remind the people what your show is as well, and where else they can find your stuff.
Absolutely. As Kevin mentioned, you can find me on Twitter at The Real Forno. I've got a lot of irons in the fire. I just started my own Viking-centric YouTube channel called Vikings First and Skol. We do a lot of NFL draft content on there. We just did a full first-round mock. It's about an hour and a half. It's with 3 really smart NFL draft minds, and I would highly recommend you go check it out. It's just honestly a fun discussion between friends who all are incredibly knowledgeable with this draft class and these prospects. I also do features for various websites. I run the Vikings Wire, and I have scouting reports fully done in 60 different players. So you can go check out. That's my pin tweet, and then you can just click that Google sheet, and everything's hyperlinked to make it super easy, and you can just read all my thoughts on every player that I've scouted. And we are at this exact moment 15 days away from the NFL draft, and Kevin, I cannot freaking wait.
Yep, this is the best time of year, and unless you win the Super Bowl, I'll grant you that. If you win the Super Bowl, that takes precedence. But other than that, I think the draft season is the best season. So excited to get there here, and yeah, like you said, just 2 weeks away now. We're almost there, guys. Thank you all so much for tuning in to Dirty Birds and Brews. I'm your host, Kevin Knight at Falcoholic. Kevin, please subscribe on YouTube if you're watching us there. If you're listening to the podcast audio, leave us that 5-star review wherever you get your podcast. Really appreciate that, guys. We will be back on Wednesday for another Falcoholic Live at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we'll see you there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Dirty Birds and Brews. Have a great night, folks.